We're going to learn the different techniques to import these characters from our zombie herd into Animatron. So let's get started. Now that we have Animatron open, you can see that I have a character in the library. So we can just click and drag him out, and there he is. Now I created this character completely within Animatron using the pen tool and pencil tool and the fill. So let's click into him. And we can see every piece that can be animated is on a separate layer. Now we have the head. That's a completely separate group. So is the body, the upper arm, the lower arm. And you can see the joints have already been moved to be animated. Now when you create characters, you tend to want to have in mind how the character is going to be animated before you create the puppet itself. I created a zombie and I created a series of zombies because for the purpose of this tutorial, it's not really animation, it's how to import these different graphics in different ways. So I didn't really need to break down this puppet too much because zombies don't actually move that very much. But if I needed to, I could make more assets and keep them in the library and pull them out on the canvas as I needed them. But for purposes of this tutorial, zombies are going to be perfect. But as you can see, everything's broken down, and we can go into the head group and see that we can go in and animate the eyeball, the hanging eyeball if we need to. We can animate the brain separately. We can bring the brows down to make him more angry. So all those elements are separate. So we can undo those. Okay, so let's go back out to the main scene. So since I created this character completely within Animatron, he's completely vector. There are a couple other ways that you could import graphics into Animatron. You can apply this to any sort of graphic you want to animate or have inside a comp within Animatron. But for this tutorial, I used characters. Okay, so maybe you're more comfortable in another program. Photoshop, Illustrator, CorelDRAW. Now you can create the graphics or characters in those programs and import them into Animatron. The first thing I'm going to show you is how to import an SVG. Now an SVG is a scalable vector graphic. Programs like Inkscape, CorelDRAW, and Adobe Illustrator can export SVGs. All you have to do is save them out as an SVG and import them right into Animatron. So let's switch gears and take a look at a character I built in Adobe Illustrator. So now let's take a look at the character I built in Adobe Illustrator. You can see that just like the one I built in Animatron, everything's broken down to a separate layer, the feet, the hands, the head, and so on and so on. And basically after you're done building your graphic or your character, you just have to save it out to an SVG file. We can go right up to File, Save a Copy, and the Save a Copy dialog box comes up, and we'll just choose an SVG file. We'll save that. The SVG options dialog box comes up. The default settings are fine. You shouldn't need to change anything. So we'll hit OK. And it saved out our SVG files. So let's switch back over and I'll meet you back in Animatron. Okay, so we're back in Animatron and click the menu button in the upper left hand corner. Import image SVG or audio files. We'll click that. We want to select the file from our computer. We'll go ahead and go in our zombie tutorial folder. And there's our zombie girl SVG. So we'll choose that. Animatron loads it up, and there she is. So she's all ready to go. We'll click into her. And you can see that every layer, she's broken down to all the layers that were broken down in Adobe Illustrator. All we have to do is change the registration point of each part. So we'll first start with the head. We'll click onto that black dot and we're able to move it to where we want the joint to hinge on. So now that when we rotate that to animate it, it'll rotate on that pivot. Now let's do the upper arm. Just click on that black dot. It'll turn orange, and you can move it wherever you want. And now it'll hinge from that point. We'll do the same for the lower arm. We'll do the same for the hand. Put it at the wrist. Can make that. Let's go with the back arm. The back hand. Let's hide those so we can go to the, get that back arm. There it is. We can click that, bring it upwards. Let's do the body next. We're gonna have it hinge at the waist. Let's grab the neck and have that hinge at the base for the shoulders. Let's go to the torso, have that bend at the waist as well. And as soon as we're done this, our character will be ready to be animated. Now you could have broke this character down much further. It really depends on how you plan on animating them. We could have broke the fingers down to each individual finger. We could have broke the foot up in several parts. And now she's ready to be animated. So we can go back out. Let's shrink her just a little bit. And she's ready to go. Simple as exporting an SVG file from a program that you're more comfortable creating graphics and characters in. It's fairly simple. You just import them in, change the pivot points of each part of the body, then your character's ready to be animated. It's fairly simple. So now we have 2 zombies in our horde so far. Let's name the layers. Now that we've gone over SVGs, now what if you don't have a vector character you want to bring into Animatron? So let's take a look at how to import characters via Photoshop file. So let's open up Photoshop. Now we're in Photoshop and we have another zombie character. And as you can see, just like in the Animatron character and just like in the Adobe Illustrator character, I have laid out in this PSD each part of this character on a separate layer. Now, depending on how you want to animate your character, you'd have it broken down. Now, depending on the animation you want to create with your character, you'd have this broken down a little bit differently. It's a zombie, he's not going to move that much, so what I have him broken down to is perfectly fine. Now, Animatron cannot read a PSD file. You cannot import that PSD with an Animatron because it will just reject it. What we have to do here is we have to save each one of these out a PNG file. Animatron can read PNG files with the alpha channel behind it. So it will import that piece of this character with that alpha channel with it not being matted on a background. Let's start doing that. So all we have to do is just we'll hide this whole character at first. Right now your crop tool is going to be your best friend. We'll crop around that foot. File, save as. We want to use the ping file. We'll use shoe 1. And we'll save that. And now we'll undo that cropping and do the same thing for that second foot. File, save as, shoe 2. Make sure you check. Just ping, save. Okay. Undo that crop. And just go down the layers and crop and save each one as a ping file. So we'll continue to do this. That's the lower left arm. It's a tedious process, but as soon as you get in the swing of things, it's pretty easy. You just got to remember, you don't want to save your PSD file when you crop it. You're just saving as a ping. So you do have to pay attention. And then we'll save the head out, crop around the head. Crop around. Okay, so now that we have all our parts saved out and do pings, we can go ahead and switch back over to Animatron. Okay, so now that we're back in Animatron, we can start to import those ping files we saved out from Photoshop. But before we start, I gotta give you a little warning that ping files tend to be fairly large, especially when you're dealing with pings with like alpha channels and the transparency. It may not be the route you want to go when you're using Animatron, because Animatron's an online vector-based software. You tend to want smaller file sizes. But if you have like a unique drawing style that you cannot replicate in a vector-based software, like you want something to have like a sketchy look or you want it to look hand-drawn, you really have no other options. You either have to sacrifice the file size for the style or sacrifice the style for the size. So with that being said, let's start importing our ping zombie. So again, we'll just go right to the upper left-hand corner, the Animatron logo menu button, import, select the file from your computer, and we will start importing our zombie. Make that first ping image a group, so we'll go into that group, and we can start importing those files right into the group. So again, we'll just go right down the list, import these files. We don't have to place them right away, just make sure that they're all imported, and then we can go through each piece and swap layers and name the layers. Okay, so now that we have all these imported, we can start to build our character. So let's just place things where they need to be. And there we go. He's all together now. Now you could have broke up your character or your graphic in a bunch of different ways. It all depends on how you wanted to animate it. I kind of limited his parts because, again, he's a zombie. He's not going to move that much. I don't want to be importing 1,000 different pieces just for this one character. But if your character has like 80 legs or 100 wings, long flowing separate pieces of hair, more power to you. Now, the only thing we have left to do here is change the axis point of each piece of this character so they rotate on that axis. So let's take a minute. That done. And again, just gotta click on that black dot. It will turn orange, and then you can move it freely wherever you need to. Now you can see why we cropped each piece of this character, because even though there is a transparency, there still is that bounding box around that transparency. So if we kept the image the same size as the whole character, this hand bounding box would be the size of the character for each piece. And that gets very confusing very fast. And I recommend testing each piece to see if they are going to animate fairly well. That looks good. Let's hide that organ. Get that torso. Put it up just a little bit. Okay, so let's group together the head and hair. So select those layers and just make them a group. And we'll move that point down here. Now that we move the head, the hair will move with it. All right, so I think we are good. Last thing we have to do is just name the layers, and he's ready to be animated. So let's real quick name these layers. Okay, so let's take a look at this on the main canvas. He's a little bit bigger, so we'll scale him down just a little bit. There we go. And he looks great. Now let's zoom in and take a look at the quality difference between the zombies that I made in Adobe Illustrator and the one we just imported from Photoshop. So if we zoom in, you can start to see that our zombie from Photoshop, the difference in the rastered image and the vector-based. Now if we continue zooming in, you can start to really see this image break apart right around his ear, and our zombie girl still looks very crisp. And the same with our zombie guy that we made in Animatron. Scroll back over to our ping zombie. Now, there's no way around this. Once you import a rastered image, it still has those pixels that represent the image itself. And we imported this zombie at about 150 dpi. Any lower than 150 dpi would really affect the quality. You can import it at 72 or 100, but I suggest doing a few tests before you save your PSD file at that lower DPI, or save a version of it at that lower DPI, because it really will affect the quality of your image. But at 150, it's still pretty high for the internet, but like I said before, you have to choose between quality, size, or size and quality. So our horde is starting to take shape. Before we go any further, let's actually add her to our library and him to our library. Okay, so the last way I'm going to show you how to import a character into Animatron is just a rastered JPEG image. Let's make our canvas size a little bit wider so we have room. So yeah, it's just a regular JPEG image. So we'll just go to the menu, import, select file from your computer. And here is our zombie head. And this is just a regular JPEG rastered image. I created this character within Photoshop and I saved it out as a JPEG. As you can see, it does not have that transparency as the ping does, but we can vectorize this rastered image. So you just select that image, you click vectorize up in this menu right here. Now we can control the number of colors, the smallest pixel area, and the shape smoothness. Now, the top one, the number of colors, depends on if you have a colored image. But we have a black and white image, so we can bring it down to 2, because it's just black and white. But if you had a colored image, you could increase the color ratio by just going further, by having a higher number. I suggest bringing in black and white line art, unless it's like a real photo. But if it's like line art, like something you drew within Photoshop, I suggest making it black and white because it's going to make it a lot easier to vectorize, and you can just change the colors once you have them in Animatron. Bring the shape smoothness down because it's going to give us more detail. And we'll leave that smallest component pixel area where it's at. We'll preview that and see how that looks. Came out good. So we'll hit OK. And if we zoom in a little bit, you can see that you get kind of a cool, sketchy feel when Animatron vectorizes it. So if you want that like ink and paper look, it's really a cool option. So we'll go in there and we can, since it vectorized the whole image and use those 2 colors, we can select that background, delete it, go back out to the canvas, and we can see that we now have that transparency. We deleted that vectorized backdrop. Now, so let's go into the vectorized zombie head again to see actually what Animatron did. So if we take a look, you can actually see down all these layers what Animatron did to vectorize was to make shapes for each part. So if we start to take this apart, you can actually see what I mean. So we can take this whole separate part, and then there's that black outline. It's actually a full shape. And it did the same thing with the eyes, and then the nose. We can undo that. Now the next step would be to actually start changing the fill colors of this character. But before we do that, I have a separate image. Let's undo that. I have a separate image of this same head with less details. Now when you're vectorizing an image like this, let's hide the other zombies real fast. Now if you're going to vectorize an image like this, something you drew, the less details, the better. And you can see, like, as we vectorize this, the thicker the lines, they came out better than the thin ones, like in the eye wrinkles and the face crease. I actually created a second image with thicker lines and less detail, because you know what? As soon as we vectorize it, we can go into that zombie head and adjust things and add details with the Animatron tools. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's import that second image. Before we do that, let's fix that real fast. We want it to exist at the very beginning of the timeline. So let's import that other image. So we'll go up to the menu, import, select file from computer, zombie head 2, and choose. And there it is. So we'll drag that up here. And now you can see between the first image we imported and the second that I eliminated a lot of the small details and I thickened a lot of the lines. So let's go ahead and move this over here as our vector image, and let's select our new rastered image and vectorize that. So we'll bring that right back down again. We'll make it 2 colors because it's black and white. We'll leave the smallest component. That's fine. Right there. Let's preview it. Now it might take you a couple times to go through the vectorization process to see what you like. Let's hit OK with that. Let's drag that next to the other vectorize. Let's delete that background back to the scene, and let's compare those two. Now you can clearly see that this one's a lot better shape than the previous one we did. The inner ear is a lot thicker. Around the mouth, it's good. But now all we have to do is go right into okay, so let's go. All we have to do is go into this one and add the details. Let's get rid of the original rastered image. Let's put the one with the detail in our library. We can then delete that one off the canvas. Let's drag these two guys back onto the main canvas. We can go into let's select him because for some reason he is off center, so we'll drag him. And go to the top. Let's drag that original rastered image in here just for a reference to to where we want to put those details. So we can lock all the other layers. Let's add a new layer and start to add some of those details in. Now you can do this for everything that you import, like the one we imported from Adobe Illustrator or the one we imported from Photoshop, the ping files. You can go back in, make new layers, and start to add more detail as needed. And let's start adding more of these details. I'm going to use the pen tool, so let's zoom in just a little bit. We'll make a new layer. And we'll start using the pen tool. We can add that crease in the face just by using the pen tool and the convert Bezier. Let's adjust that a little bit. There we go. We can delete that reference. And we can name that layer. So now let's unlock all these layers, and now let's change some of the colors. Now these are all fills, so it's real quick. He's done. Let's take a look at him on the main canvas. There we go. And you can see that those details look a lot better when you create them in Animatron than having them a part of the actual rasterized image. So we can delete that. Let's put him in our library. Okay, so let's move his axis point to the center of his face. Let's unhide the rest of the horde. And shrink him down to actual head size. Maybe a little bit smaller. That looks great. And of course, we can change our canvas size back to 720. And the head is obviously not going to be standing upright, so we can have him laying there. And now all our characters are imported and ready to animate in Animatron. So that's the end of this tutorial. I hope you learned a thing or two about importing characters into Animatron using other programs. I suggest playing around and trying a few different techniques. What I like to use is a combination of different programs to create one character. I hope you have fun creating characters and animating them in Animatron. I will see you next time.